Welcome back. I'm Imana, and this is the Dandelion Chronicles, where we explore healing, faith, growth, and the beauty that can emerge from life's hardest seasons. Before we begin, if these conversations have encouraged or challenged you in any way, I invite you to subscribe, rate, and share the podcast. And if you feel led, share your own stories of healing and growth because your story could become the light someone else needs. Now, let me ask you something. How many times have you apologized for things that were never your fault? How many times have you said, "Sorry for bothering you, sorry for asking, sorry for feeling this way, sorry for existing," or "sorry for taking up space," before you even realize what you were apologizing for? I used to say "I'm sorry" constantly, even when someone else crossed my boundaries, when someone misunderstood me, or when someone else created the discomfort. I apologize automatically. And truth is, I didn't fully recognize how often I did it until my husband pointed it out to me years ago. And it got me to thinking, I did apologize all the time. But I used to think apologizing was simply politeness. But as I continued to grapple with why I apologize so much, I was shown something so much deeper. Saying sorry had become a way of being for me. I began to realize that my apologizing stemmed from fear. And I think many trauma responses are rooted in fear. Some fight, some people flee, and some people just shut down. And some people, like me, become people pleasers. So we can avoid conflict, rejection, abandonment, criticism, or making others uncomfortable. And eventually, we apologize, not because we were wrong, but because we were conditioned to please others more often than ourselves or even God. And that stung because I began recognizing how often I had abandoned my own emotional needs just to make other people around me comfortable. Some of us learned to apologize before we ever learned that we were worthy. And when it happens, sorry stops becoming language and starts becoming identity. We apologize for having emotions, setting boundaries, saying no, disappointing people, needing rest, speaking honestly, being too much, or not being enough. And eventually, we stop asking ourselves a very important question. Am I compulsively apologizing for simply existing? Because many of us were taught, directly or indirectly, that love required us to be selfless, that being accepted required compromise, that we should be seen and not heard, that we should accept bad behavior, or that the bad behavior of others is somehow our fault. And when you live that way long enough, you may not even realize you have no boundaries at all. You say yes even when your spirit is screaming no. You feel guilty for calling others out when they hurt you. You overextend yourself, sometimes to your own detriment. And then you wonder why you feel emotionally exhausted and disconnected from yourself. I think excessive apologizing often comes from an unconscious fear that our existence is an inconvenience to people, that our needs are somehow burdensome, that our emotions are excessive, that our boundaries will lead to rejection. So we soften ourselves constantly. We explain ourselves, and we even bend our own morals. And many people become so accustomed to it that they no longer recognize their own voice, desires, boundaries, or worth. That's so heartbreaking to me because God never asked us to disappear to be accepted, appreciated, or loved. Over apologizing is often just people pleasing in disguise. But God tells us that we don't need to constantly seek human approval. You were already perfectly and intentionally created in His image, which means that our value was already settled in Him. If God intentionally created us, then why are we apologizing for taking up space in the world that He placed us in? Why are we compromising ourselves for people who do not appreciate the beauty God created within us? Maybe some of us have spent our entire lives apologizing for qualities that were never flaws to begin with. Our sensitivity, our softness, our honesty, our depth, our voice, our presence. Some people simply don't recognize the value of what God created. But their inability to recognize our worth does not lessen it. There's another lesson that dandelions have taught me. No matter what they're called, or other people's disdain for them, or their attempts to uproot or cut them down, they grow anyway. And this is important to note. Dandelions do not compromise themselves to bloom. They do not apologize for taking up space. They do not shrink because someone else feels uncomfortable with their existence. They simply continue reaching toward the light that they were created for. And spiritually, I think many of us were taught the opposite. We learn to compromise ourselves to be accepted, to shrink ourselves to be loved, to silence ourselves to keep the peace, or to betray ourselves to maintain connection. But constant compromise does not create true peace within us. It creates a disconnection from ourselves and God. And often, we abandon ourselves trying to maintain relationships that would remain uncomfortable no matter how much we shrink ourselves. Another hard truth is some people, more than we care to acknowledge, benefit from our lack of boundaries. Some people feel more comfortable when we stay quiet, overgive, over-explain, over-apologize, tolerate disrespect, or minimize our own needs because our people-pleasing created space for their comfort. But healing changes things. The more we begin understanding our God-given worth, the more uncomfortable, unhealthy relationships become. And sometimes people who were comfortable with the compromised version of us often struggle when we begin standing fully in ourselves. Not because we have done anything wrong to them, but because we started loving ourselves. The beautiful thing about God's love is that we never have to compromise ourselves to receive it. We don't need to perform or pretend or even disappear. We can come honestly with our fears, wounds, scars, emotions, and questions. And through His love, we begin to realize that we don't need to apologize for existing because God does not create mistakes. Remember, His word tells us that we are created in His image. And if that is true, then perhaps many of us have spent far too much of our lives apologizing for being reflections of God that other people fail to understand. Healing has taught me that boundaries are necessary. The word no is a complete sentence, and it does not need an explanation or apology. Having love for ourselves is not arrogance. Protecting our peace is not rejection. Some of us become so afraid of offending others that we apologize for our own humanity. But the truth is, the people who cannot or refuse to appreciate our God-given beauty and uniqueness will likely remain uncomfortable no matter how much you compromise yourself. So maybe healing looks like this: no longer pleasing people, or over-explaining, or apologizing for your existence, or even betraying yourself to maintain acceptance. Maybe healing looks like finally believing that God created you intentionally. And maybe, like the dandelion, you were never meant to compromise yourself to grow. If this episode spoke to you, take a moment to subscribe, rate, and share the podcast. And if you feel led, share your own stories of healing, boundaries, growth, and reclaiming your voice, because your story may become the encouragement someone else needs to stop apologizing for who they are. I'm Imana, and this is the Dandelion Chronicles. Until next time, keep growing. And remember, search for your peace and the peace of God within you.